I stood at the foot of the stairs leading to the jet, the low rumble of the engines vibrating through the air, the pungent scent of burning fuel filling my lungs. The sun dipped below the horizon, stretching shadows across the tarmac, but none of it held my attention. My focus was locked on my wife, my own wife, who stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded tightly, her gaze sharper and colder than I had ever seen it. Only family is allowed. The words didn't strike immediately. They lingered, suspended in the air, waiting to pierce through me, to sink deep into my chest. I let out a short laugh, not from humor, but from sheer disbelief. That's a joke, right? She didn't react. No flinch, no shift in expression, just a slight tilt of her head, her impatience growing. You're not on the list. This trip is for board members and family only. Board members. Family. My jaw tightened. And what exactly am I, Isabella? She sighed, the kind of exasperated breath reserved for someone explaining the obvious to an oblivious intern. Not for the man who had built her empire with his own hands. You knew this was a strategic business retreat. There's no reason to take this personally. No reason? I took a step back, slow and deliberate, my eyes scanning the faces already seated inside the jet. The company I had built. The product I had developed. The team I had trained from the ground up. Yet somehow I was the outsider. Understood. My voice was even controlled. I refused to let her see any hint of weakness, refused to give her the satisfaction of thinking she had the power to break me. Her assistant stepped forward, already gesturing to security as though I were just another intruder, an unwelcome presence loitering near the runway. The sheer arrogance of it almost made me laugh again. Another step back. I watched as the jet's doors sealed shut, as the engines roared, as my so-called partner departed without me. I stood motionless, eyes fixed on the shrinking silhouette of the aircraft until it disappeared into the sky. In the reflection of the terminal's glass windows, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. A man who had given everything and been left with nothing. No, that wasn't entirely true. She believed she had erased me from her success. But in doing so, she had made the gravest mistake of her life. If she wanted me gone, if she thought she could erase my presence from the empire we built together, then I would take things even further. I would erase her empire completely. I remember the first time I laid eyes on Isabella. She wasn't the woman she is today, polished, ruthless, sitting atop an empire that bore the imprint of my work but none of my name. Back then, she was relentless, clawing for survival as her struggling tech startup teetered on the brink of failure. Her reputation had preceded her. People in the industry knew her, not as an innovator but as a master of persuasion. She could sell a dream, captivate investors with her unwavering confidence, convince them she belonged in boardrooms even if the technology she pitched was beyond her depth. But that was her flaw. She had the connections, the influence, the ability to spin a compelling vision, but she lacked the foundation. The tangible, groundbreaking substance to support the future she promised. That's where I came in. I wasn't just a software engineer. I had something the tech world had been chasing for years, a revolutionary algorithm that could reshape the industry. Hypersync. It had started as a passion project, a late-night obsession developed in my dimly lit apartment. A breakthrough in AI-driven automation designed to optimize business operations in real time, seamlessly adapting without the need for human intervention. It was cutting-edge. It was transformative. It just needed the right stage. And Isabella? She had the stage. We crossed paths at a tech summit. I had spent the last of my savings to afford a ticket, determined to get my work in front of the right people. In contrast, she was there as a guest speaker, preaching innovation while her own company barely held itself together. She noticed me before I even saw her. I was in the demo hall demonstrating Hypersync to a small, skeptical audience, letting the software speak for itself. On my laptop screen, the system adapted in real time, data flows adjusting seamlessly, business infrastructures recalibrating without a second of delay. It was undeniable. It was revolutionary. Across the room, she watched. She waited until the crowd dispersed before she approached, her expression unreadable. You created this? There was something sharp in her voice, something deliberate. I nodded. Yeah. Her lips curled into a smile, not one of politeness, but of recognition. Of opportunity. I think we need to talk. That conversation stretched for hours. She didn't just ask about the technology, she wanted to understand me. Who I was. What drove me. What my vision was. I answered honestly. I don't care about fame. I just want this to exist. I want it to be used. Then she said the words that altered the course of my entire future. You have the brains. I have the resources. Together, we'd be unstoppable. It was the perfect pitch. She confided in me about the struggles of her startup. admitting she was on the brink of losing investor confidence. But then she proposed something that changed everything. If we combined my software with her infrastructure, we could reshape the industry. It wasn't just empty words. I could see the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time, I saw a future for my work that didn't involve me sitting in solitude, hoping someone would recognize its value. So I agreed. Two strangers became partners. The next few years were a whirlwind of dedication, long nights, and unwavering belief. I immersed myself in perfecting HyperSync, refining its capabilities until it became faster, sharper, and more adaptable than anything the world had ever seen. Meanwhile, Isabella worked tirelessly on the business side, securing investors, forming strategic partnerships, and ensuring we gained media attention. It was an electrifying experience. We weren't just colleagues, we were equals. Or at least that's what I thought. As time passed, our late-night strategy sessions transformed into intimate dinners, and what started as professional admiration deepened into something more. Before I even realized it, I had fallen in love with her. She wasn't just my business partner. She was the person who had believed in me when no one else did. She saw the potential in my work, championed my ideas, and fought to bring them into reality. In return, I trusted her without question. We married before HyperSync even fully took off. It felt like the natural next step, an unspoken promise not just to each other, but to our shared vision. HyperSync wasn't just a company. It was our creation, the embodiment of our dreams, something we would build and nurture together. Or so I thought. At first, the changes were subtle, so small that I ignored them. Isabella started handling press interviews on her own, brushing off my role as though I was merely the unseen force behind the technology. Investors and media outlets began to associate HyperSync solely with her, and soon, I found myself being treated as just another employee rather than the co-founder. Even in meetings, she would subtly correct anyone who referred to HyperSync as our company, gently shifting the narrative to imply it was hers alone. I told myself it wasn't important. After all, we were a team, weren't we? What did it matter who got the credit as long as we were both benefiting from our success? But in hindsight, that was the moment the scales tipped, the moment I should have realized something was wrong. Because Isabella wasn't just ambitious. She wasn't just determined. She was insatiable. And soon, I would learn the extent to which she was willing to go to maintain her position at the top. Success has a way of clouding your vision. When you're struggling, you focus only on survival, on making things work. There's no space for ego or power plays. In the early days of HyperSync, Isabella and I were equals, united by a common goal. But once the money started flowing, once investors began pouring millions into our company, the dynamics shifted. Or maybe she did. At first, the changes were easy to dismiss. Isabella naturally took on more media appearances, and I let her. It made sense. She had the charisma, the connections, the ability to win people over. I never craved the spotlight. I was content letting her be the face of the company while I focused on the technology. Then the language started to change. During board meetings, she stopped referring to HyperSync as our company. Instead, it became her company. HyperSync is a product of my vision, she would say. When I started this company, I knew we were going to revolutionize the industry. I would sit there, forcing a polite smile, convincing myself that the phrasing didn't matter, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But it wasn't just words. She started making major decisions without consulting me. I learned about a government partnership, one that would fundamentally alter the direction of our company, through a press release. A new expansion strategy, which deviated entirely from my original concept, was discussed with the board before I even knew about it. The company's branding subtly shifted to center around her. Our official website no longer listed me as a co-founder, reducing my role to that of a lead developer. One day, I finally confronted her. We sat in our sleek office, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city skyline below. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Isabella, we built this together. Why do I feel like I'm being pushed out?" She barely looked up from her laptop, letting out a sigh. "You're overthinking it," she said, her tone dismissive. "Investors need a strong leader, someone they can trust. The public needs a recognizable figure. You've never been comfortable with that role. I frowned, my chest tightening. That's not the issue. The issue is that you're erasing me from Hypersync's story. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. Don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows you're part of this. That was a lie. The world didn't know because she had made sure of it. Then came the share transfer. Isabella called I. She had lounged on the plush couch in our penthouse, sipping wine as though we were discussing something as trivial as dinner plans rather than the future of the empire I had built from the ground up. We need to consolidate our power, she had said, her voice smooth, measured. The board believes the company would be more stable if the majority shares were under a single name. It simplifies legal matters and minimizes risks when making bold moves. A weight settled in my stomach. What risks? I asked, my unease creeping in. She waved a hand dismissively. Nothing major. Just a formality, really. It won't change anything between us. What's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. I should have questioned her then. Should have considered why she was suddenly pushing for everything to be under her control. But I didn't. Because I trusted her. Because I was blind. And so I signed. With each stroke of my pen, I relinquished my stake, my authority, my control. Isabella pressed a kiss to my cheek, her smile warm, reassuring. See? We're a team. This just makes everything cleaner. I remember hesitating, holding the pen a moment too long before finally setting it down. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a whisper of doubt stirred, a quiet warning that I had just made the gravest mistake of my life. And I had. From that moment, everything unraveled faster than I could grasp. Isabella grew bolder. She began hosting high-level executive meetings I wasn't invited to. When I confronted her, she only shrugged. Just strategy sessions. You've never been a fan of boardroom politics anyway. The following week, I discovered my personal projects had been reassigned. The teams I had built, the initiatives I had spearheaded, were now under her direct supervision. My people no longer reported to me. Then came the final blow. Hypersync was gearing up for an ambitious global expansion, the most significant milestone in the company's history. I should have been at the forefront. I should have been leading the charge. Instead, Isabella had arranged an exclusive retreat for the board. A private jet trip. A strategy session that would define the future of the company. I wasn't invited. I only found out when I spotted the itinerary sitting on her desk. I confronted her immediately. You didn't even tell me about this trip. She barely looked up. I didn't think you'd be interested. It's mostly PR. You've always hated that kind of thing. I stared at her, the realization hitting like a punch to the gut. I co-founded this company, Isabella. She sighed, her tone laced with exasperation. Yes, and you'll still be here when we return. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Because she had already decided I was expendable. My fists clenched. I gave up everything for this company. For you. Finally, she met my gaze. But there was no guilt. No second thoughts. Just cold, unwavering confidence. And I appreciate that, she said smoothly. But things evolve. You can't take this personally. The beginning of my revenge. That was the moment clarity struck. The moment I stopped pretending. Isabella was no longer my partner. No longer my wife. She was my enemy. And soon she would understand just how much damage I could do. I felt it the second I stepped onto the tarmac. A hollow sensation in my gut. The same whisper of unease I had ignored when I signed over my shares. Only this time I wouldn't ignore it. The private jet stood before me, engines humming, the heat radiating through the air. I could already see the executives boarding, the very people I had mentored, the ones who had once looked up to me. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, the dawn of a new era for Hypersync. But as I approached the stairs, she was there. Standing at the top. Arms crossed. Expression unreadable. I frowned. Are you coming down? She didn't move. Instead, she offered a small, almost amused smile and spoke words I would never forget. Only family is allowed. It took a moment for the meaning to register. A second too long. I let out a dry laugh. What? Surely this was a joke. She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. You're not on the list, she said, her tone even, detached. It's a private retreat. Strictly for board members and family. Something inside me turned to ice. The company I had built. The product I had created. The legacy I had sacrificed for. And I wasn't even considered a part of it anymore. I glanced toward the jet, at the people inside. People who had once worked under me, who had once valued my leadership. Now they couldn't even meet my eyes. They had known. All of them had known. I took a slow step back, searching her face for any flicker of regret, any sign that she was second-guessing herself. There was none. You're serious, I said quietly. She sighed. her tone light, as if she were explaining something obvious. This isn't personal. The board just thought it would be best if we moved forward with a more streamlined leadership structure. The shift in leadership was unmistakable. I wanted to confront her, to demand when she had decided to turn against me. At what precise moment had she stopped being my partner and instead become the architect of my removal from the very company we had built together? But I didn't ask because deep down I already knew. I knew the exact moment when everything changed. I could have fought back, could have challenged her, could have demanded an explanation for her betrayal. But I didn't, because as I stood at the base of that jet, the heat of the sun warming my skin, the distant hum of the engines signaling their impending departure, without me, I saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about a business trip. It was a declaration, a statement that I no longer had a place in what I had created. Isabella wasn't merely leaving me behind for this trip. She was cutting me out completely. She was rewriting the story of Hypersync, erasing my role, ensuring that when the company's history was told, my name would be nothing more than a footnote in her success. And if I reacted, if I lashed out, begged, or made a scene, I would become exactly what she wanted. A desperate man clinging to something that had already slipped from his grasp. So I made a choice. I took a slow, measured breath, forcing my heartbeat to steady. Then, with deliberate composure, I stepped back and gave a single nod. My voice was steady, betraying none of the storm inside me. Understood. For just a fraction of a second, Isabella hesitated. A blink, a flicker of surprise. She had expected me to fight, to argue, to plead for my place. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I turned away and walked off the tarmac. Behind me, the engines roared to life. I didn't turn back. Not when the wheels lifted off the ground. Not when the jet vanished into the sky. Not even when it felt like my entire world was taking off without me. Because she believed she had won. She thought she had finally severed me from everything I had built. But she had no idea that in this moment, she had given me something far greater. Something she could never take back. She had handed me my revenge. By the time I reached my car, my mind was already in motion. Isabella had spent years convincing herself that she was untouchable, that she was the true genius behind Hypersync, that I had been nothing more than a technical footnote in her empire. And in doing so, she had made a critical mistake. She had forgotten who had built this company from the ground up. She had forgotten the architect behind its foundation, the creator of the very system that powered it. She had forgotten that beneath the layers of innovation and automation, at the very core of everything, was something she did not own. The software, the security, the framework that kept Hypersync alive. And all of it was still mine. Now I had nothing left to lose. Isabella believed she had stripped me of everything. But there was one thing she hadn't taken. Something she hadn't even realized I still possessed. The source code, the security keys, and the failsafe I had built into the system from the very beginning. A safeguard, a kill switch, a contingency plan I had embedded in the code back when I still believed in our partnership, back when I had thought we were in this together. She thought she had locked me out, erased me from my own creation. She believed she had won. But she had no idea. For the first time since this battle had begun, I was no longer playing defense. Now I was going to take everything back. Not just my company, not just my legacy. I was going to dismantle her empire, piece by piece, line by line, until nothing remained but ashes. The first move. I didn't return home that night. There was no point. The penthouse, the one we had bought together when Hypersync first reached $1 billion valuation, felt more like a museum now. A shrine to her triumph, where my presence had been reduced to an afterthought. No, I needed a different space. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could think, plan, and execute. So I drove to the one place that was still undeniably mine. A private development server I had secured years ago, back when Hypersync was just an idea. A vision that I had brought to life line by line, piece by piece. No one knew about it. Not Isabella. Not the board. Not even the engineers who worked beneath me. It was my contingency. And tonight it would be the foundation of her downfall. The hidden code. Hypersync wasn't just a tech company. It was an ecosystem, an automated network that powered everything from high-frequency trading firms to global supply chains. Designed to be impenetrable, its security layers were more sophisticated than those of most government systems. But there was one vulnerability. A flaw I had deliberately woven into the source code from the very beginning. Not out of paranoia, but as a safeguard. A hidden backdoor buried deep beneath layers of encrypted pathways. Disguised as an unremarkable, rarely accessed subroutine. To anyone else, it would appear to be nothing more than an obsolete function, a fragment of forgotten code. But to me, it was the kill switch. The first move. The interface felt like a second home, the familiar layout, the steady blink of the cursor, the quiet hum of a system waiting for a command. Everything was just as it should be. She thought she had locked me out of my own creation, convinced that I was powerless. But she was wrong. With a few precise keystrokes, I navigated my way back into the master framework. There was no need to rush. At that very moment, Isabella was mid-flight, comfortably seated among her carefully chosen executives, the board members who now served as her inner circle. She basked in her illusion of control, oblivious to the fact that her reign was about to crumble. She never saw these things coming. She never did. The first step was a diagnostic scan. Data scrolled rapidly across the screen, hundreds of servers, millions of active users, a network valued in the billions. And at its core, everything still traced back to my original code. With that confirmation, I initiated my first move, a subtle yet decisive security reconfiguration. To the untrained eye, nothing seemed different. Hypersync continued operating as usual, its digital heartbeat steady and uninterrupted. But beneath the surface, every top-tier access key was revoked. Isabella, her executives, the board, none of them could log in. They couldn't make a single critical change to the system. Only one person still had control. Me. I leaned back in my chair, watching as the system adjusted itself to my new directives. She wouldn't notice right away. Not immediately. But soon, very soon, she would wake to a reality where her authority had vanished. The next morning, my phone rang at precisely 6 minutes past 7. I let it ring. Then again. And again. Finally, I picked up, knowing exactly who was on the other end. Erin. No greeting. No formalities. Just her voice, sharp, frantic, teetering on the edge of panic. Hypersync is locked down. We can't access anything. What have you done? A slow smile formed as I listened to the cracks in her carefully controlled tone. Fear. She was afraid. I kept my response deliberately casual. Good morning, Isabella. Is something wrong? Her exhale was sharp, frustration seeping into every word. Drop the act. The system is rejecting all executive logins. The entire board is locked out and our engineers can't override it. I know you're behind this. I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch between us before delivering the words I knew she never expected to hear. Sorry, but only family is allowed. Then, nothing. Just quiet on her end. I could picture her perfectly, standing in some lavish hotel suite, phone gripped tightly, her carefully constructed empire slipping through her fingers. She began, but I didn't let her finish. Let's get something clear, Isabella, I said, my voice colder now. You didn't create Hypersync. I did. You didn't design this system. I did. And you don't own it. I do. She tried to cut in, but I continued without pause. If you really believe you can erase me from the company I built, then you never understood how any of this works. A sharp inhale. Then her tone shifted, lowering into something calculated, something dangerous. You think you can take it back? She asked, her words a slow, venomous hiss. You think you can win? I let out a quiet chuckle, leaning forward as if sharing a secret. Isabella, I murmured, I already have. Then I ended the call. By the time she landed, it was over. Hypersync's entire security infrastructure had been rewritten. Every critical function now required my personal biometric authentication. The board was in complete disarray. Investors were demanding answers. And Isabella? For the first time, she faced the consequences of her own actions. She had betrayed me, forced me out of what was mine, thinking she had secured her power. But in her rush to erase me, she had overlooked the most important truth. I was the one who built this company from the ground up. I knew every piece of code, every hidden backdoor, every failsafe. And now I was going to bring it all down. The collapse had begun. After hanging up, I didn't bother trying to sleep. Instead, I sat there, phone in hand, watching as her missed calls piled up. The screen flashed with her name over and over, an unrelenting signal of her growing desperation. By 7, the call stopped. Not because she had given up, but because she had finally grasped the reality of her situation. This wasn't a minor system error. It wasn't a temporary glitch that her engineers could fix with a simple patch. This was something else entirely. This was the end, and I was the one who had written the script. At precisely 8:15, a text appeared on my screen. It wasn't from Isabella. It was from an old colleague, an engineer who had remained loyal to me before Isabella's restructuring pushed me out. They're panicking. The board is losing control. She's trying to call an emergency meeting, but no one can access anything. What did you do? I smirked as I typed back, my fingers moving leisurely over the keys. Just reminding them who built the system. Isabella wasn't one to waste time. She was sharp, ruthless, and resourceful. The moment she realized she was locked out, she acted. She called in every expert she could, top-tier cybersecurity specialists, government encryption analysts, even a handful of my former team members who had remained after my departure. But no matter who she brought in, they all encountered the same roadblock. This wasn't just a standard admin lockout. It was something much deeper, an architectural rewrite embedded into the very structure of the system. Even if they tried to bypass it, the code would rebuild itself in real time, adapting and reinforcing. She had no way in. Hypersync had sealed her out down to the very fabric of her DNA. And only one person had the key to unlock it: me. The first call had come from the board early in the morning. By the time the clock struck 10, my phone was ringing again. This time it wasn't Isabella. A board member. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Aaron," came the voice from the other end. Strained but composed, each word carefully measured. "We've run into a technical problem. I assume you're aware of it." Leaning back in my chair, I let the silence linger before responding. "I might be." A pause. Then the tone shifted, less corporate, more irritated. "What exactly are you trying to pull?" "The entire company is in lockdown. We're bleeding millions every second." I glanced at my laptop. The live feed showed Hypersync stock in freefall. The panic was palpable even through the phone. "You'll have to be more specific," I said, feigning confusion. "Are you calling for my professional expertise or just to vent your frustration?" Another pause. Then a reluctant exhale. "We need your help." There it was, the first crack in their arrogance. Drumming my fingers against the desk, I chose my next words carefully. "You need my help," I repeated, letting the weight of it settle. "That's interesting, considering last week Isabella made it very clear I was no longer part of Hypersync." "You were never officially removed," the board member interjected hastily. "That was just a misunderstanding." Save it." My voice was cold, sharp. "You locked me out of my own creation. Let her erase my name, strip me of my influence, humiliate me. And now, when everything is crumbling, you come crawling back." The silence stretched. I could sense his discomfort, his anger, his helplessness. Then, finally, he asked, "What do you want?" I smiled. "Nothing. Not yet." Then I hung up. Isabella's breaking point. By midday, Isabella finally cracked. She didn't call. She came in person. I had expected it. Isabella wasn't the kind to plead over the phone. She needed control, needed to be physically present, to command attention. But this time she had none. I opened the door to find her standing there, impeccably dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. As flawless as ever. Yet, for the first time since this battle had begun, something in her eyes was different. Fear. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She exhaled sharply, her jaw tightening. "Let me in." I didn't move. "No." Her eyes flashed with frustration. "Aaron, I don't have time for games." I smiled, unbothered. "Neither do I." She hesitated, forcing herself to steady her voice. "Look," she said, carefully measuring her tone. "We can fix this." "We?" I raised an eyebrow. Last time I checked, there was no "we" anymore. "You made sure of that." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I made a mistake." A sharp laugh escaped me. "Oh, now it's a mistake?" "When you left me stranded on that tarmac, let your board cast me aside, took everything I built, and pretended I never existed." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I did what I had to do. For the company." "Then do what you do best, Isabella," I said, stepping forward, voice dropping to something quiet, almost dangerous. "Talk your way out of this. Convince the board you've got it handled. Because as far as I'm concerned, this isn't my problem anymore." For a second, just a flicker, her breath hitched. A sign of weakness. She was losing control. "Hypersync was mine before it was ever yours," I continued. "And now, you don't own it anymore." Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "You can't do this. This company is my life, Aaron." Tilting my head, I studied her. "Funny. You didn't care about that when you erased me from it." She swallowed hard, struggling for a response. Finding none. I leaned in just enough to ensure my final words landed with the full weight of their meaning. Consider this your first lesson in losing everything. Then I shut the door in her face. The chaos spreads. By evening, the fallout had reached critical levels. Investors began withdrawing, rattled by the instability. Customers lost access to hypersync services, throwing major corporations into turmoil. The financial world took notice. News outlets picked up the scent of something deeper, whispers of internal sabotage. And Isabella? She was trapped, because the only one who could fix this was me, and I had no intention of saving her. I was only getting started. The company in freefall. The next morning I woke to chaos. Not my own, hers. Isabella's empire. The one she had meticulously built while erasing my name from its foundations, was crumbling. And she knew it. I checked the stock reports first thing. Hypersync had plummeted another 30% overnight. This wasn't just about investors anymore. The domino effect had begun. The businesses that depended on Hypersync's AI were faltering. Logistics networks ground to a halt. Banking systems experienced critical failures. AI-driven trading firms hemorrhaged millions, unable to access real-time market data. And through it all, I sat back, sipping my coffee, watching the world come to terms with a singular, undeniable truth. Hypersync was never Isabella's creation. It had always been mine. And without me, it was crumbling. The board's desperate, last-ditch attempt to salvage what was left. By mid-morning, my phone rang again. It wasn't Isabella this time. The board must have finally accepted that she was no longer in control. I let the call ring a few times before answering, letting them wait. "Gentlemen," I greeted smoothly, my voice calm. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "We need to talk," came a clipped response. "This has gone on long enough." I smirked. "Has it? You're going to destroy the company," another voice snapped. "Do you have any idea how many billions are at risk? We can negotiate. But this..." I cut him off before he could finish. "Interesting. No one seemed concerned about my stake when you all stood by and let Isabella push me out. So why should I care now?" Silence. Then, a voice softened, shifting its approach. "Look, whatever issues you have with Isabella, we can fix this. Just restore access to the system and we can..." I let out a low chuckle. "You think this is just about a grudge?" They didn't understand. They still thought I was throwing a tantrum, bitter about losing a seat at the table. They hadn't realized this wasn't about reclaiming my position. I wasn't interested in a comeback. I was dismantling it all from the inside. "You had your chance," I said, voice steady, unwavering. "You made your decision. Now you get to live with it." Then I hung up. Isabella's desperation was growing. By noon, my apartment intercom buzzed. I didn't need to check. I already knew who it was. Isabella. She was out of options, and I was the only person left who could stop the bleeding. I took my time answering, letting her wait, forcing her to sit in her own panic for a few extra seconds. When I finally opened the door, she wasted no time with formalities. The composed, sharp-edged woman who dominated boardrooms was gone. Her usual air of control had cracked. Her hair was slightly out of place, her breathing too sharp. And her eyes? They weren't furious. They weren't filled with anger. They were scared. "We need to fix this," she said immediately, stepping into my apartment as if she still had some authority over me. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Fix what?" She let out a frustrated breath, raking a hand through her hair. "Hypersync. The system. Whatever you did, you need to undo it." "Why would I do that?" Her jaw tightened. "Because the entire company is collapsing. This is bigger than just you and me, Ethan. If this continues, Hypersync is done." I studied her for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good." She inhaled sharply, just a small, involuntary gasp. But it was enough. Enough to show me the exact moment she understood. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't waiting for a deal, a payout, or an apology. I was letting it all burn, and I was enjoying every second of it. Her mind raced, trying to find another angle, another way to regain control. "You don't understand," she said, voice shifting, trying to find leverage. "This will cost you too." Your name is still tied to Hypersync. Your reputation. I laughed. My reputation? You mean the one you spent years erasing? The one you removed from every press release, every article, every award you claimed as your own. She flinched. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. I don't care about Hypersync anymore, Isabella. I care about watching you lose everything you stole from me. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Because now she truly understood. This wasn't about the board. It wasn't about the company, the stock, or even business. This was personal. And there was no coming back from it. She tried one last time, swallowing hard, forcing herself to soften. Ethan, she murmured, lowering her voice, shifting into someone I once loved. We built this together. You don't have to destroy it. We can start over. We can new. I smiled. No, Isabella. Her mouth closed. I stepped closer until there was barely any space between us and whispered the words that shattered her completely. You already did that. Her breath hitched. The moment you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't family anymore. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. Not the controlled, calculated kind I had seen her use in boardrooms to manipulate emotions. These were real. She knew it was over. I stepped back, my expression unreadable. You should go. She took a shaky breath. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The final blow landed by evening. News headlines spread like wildfire. Hypersync faces unprecedented crisis as CEO Isabella, last name, fails to regain control. Investors flee as Hypersync stock crashes. Was Hypersync's true genius erased from history? And the best part? The truth was finally coming to light. Journalists started digging. Old employees spoke out. Forgotten articles that once mentioned my name before it was wiped from company records resurfaced. People were beginning to ask the right questions. Maybe Isabella hadn't been the true mastermind after all. By midnight, Hypersync had lost half its valuation. And Isabella? She wasn't just ruined as a CEO. She wasn't just another executive who had failed. She was finished. As a legend. As an icon. As a name that once commanded respect in every boardroom. Because now the world knew. She wasn't the woman who built Hypersync. She was the woman who lost everything, and I was the one who ensured it happened. The final strike. The morning after Isabella walked out of my apartment, the world had already shifted beneath her feet. Her empire wasn't just crumbling, it was collapsing in real time, and this time there was no saving it. I watched the downfall unfold while sipping my morning coffee, my laptop open, multiple stock reports flashing across the screen. Hypersync had plummeted, losing 60% of its valuation overnight. For years, Isabella had meticulously crafted an image of dominance, control, and groundbreaking innovation. She had convinced the world that she alone was the driving force behind Hypersync's success. But in a mere 24 hours, that illusion had shattered. The same media that once glorified her now dissected every misstep, every questionable decision, every ruthless move she had made to reach the top. There was something poetic about it. She had spent so much time rewriting history, erasing me from the company's legacy, convincing herself that she was the sole architect of its success. But now? Now she was just another disgraced CEO, another executive whose name was being dragged through the mud. And the best part? I wasn't finished. The day of reckoning. By midday, my phone buzzed again. Not Isabella this time, her lawyer. I let it ring twice before answering. A composed, measured voice greeted me. Mr. Vaughn, we'd like to discuss an arrangement to e. No. Silence. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. Excuse me. Leaning back in my chair, I stretched out my legs and repeated I said no. No deals. No negotiations. The voice on the other end remained steady, but I could sense the underlying strain. Mr. Vaughn, Isabella is willing to make certain concessions. I laughed. A genuine laugh. She has nothing left to bargain with, I said simply. She lost her company, her investors, and her reputation. So tell me, what exactly is she offering? A longer pause. Then a shift in strategy. We're prepared to reinstate your position at Hypersync. You be recognized as co-founder again and... I cut him off. Hypersync doesn't exist anymore, I said smoothly. At least, not in the way she thinks it does. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then hesitation. What do you mean? I allowed myself a small smile. You'll see soon enough. And with that I ended the call. The final stage. By late afternoon I was ready. I had been waiting for this moment, orchestrating every step leading to it. Watching Hypersync collapse was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. I needed to rebuild it, this time under my name. With a few keystrokes I executed the final move. Hypersync's patents? Transferred. The AI's core structure? Migrated. The original technology? Sealed. Everything that made Hypersync a billion-dollar powerhouse was no longer within Isabella's reach. The company might still exist on paper, but its heart, its foundation, its true power? It belonged to me again. Isabella's last desperate attempt. At 7 in the evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her lawyer. It was her. A single message. Meet me. One last time. Hotel Langford. 8 p.m. I stared at the text, considering whether it was even worth acknowledging. Then I made my decision. I would go. Not for her. Not for closure. But to see the realization in her eyes the moment she finally understood it was over. The final meeting. I arrived precisely at 8. The hotel bar was quiet, dim lighting casting elongated shadows over polished mahogany. I spotted her immediately. Isabella sat in a corner booth, a glass of untouched wine in front of her. She looked different. Not broken. Not defeated. Just tired. I took my time walking over. As I approached, she lifted her gaze, her expression unreadable. I didn't think you'd come, she murmured. Sliding into the seat across from her, I rested my arms on the table. I was curious. A small, humorless chuckle escaped her lips. Curious about what? I studied her carefully, noting the subtle changes, the tension in her shoulders, the faint dark circles beneath her eyes, the way she no longer wore the armor of control. Then I spoke. How it feels. She stilled. How it feels. I tilted my head slightly. Losing everything. She inhaled sharply, and for a brief moment I saw the familiar spark, the instinct to fight back. But this time she didn't. Instead, she looked down at her glass. You were always the smarter one, she admitted quietly. I just talked better. I leaned forward, my voice calm. You took everything from me, Isabella. You erased me. And you thought I'd just let it happen. She swallowed hard. I didn't think you'd fight back. A slow, humorless smile spread across my face. That was your first mistake. She let out a breath, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. And your first mistake? I shrugged. Trusting you. A long silence stretched between us. Then, in a voice softer than I expected, she said, I never stopped loving you, you know? I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I just watched her. Because now I could see it for what it was. The last attempt. The final manipulation. She was trying to pull me back in. To make me feel something for her again. But that part of me. The part of me that once might have believed her, that might have sought to forgive her, was long gone. So I rose to my feet, slid my hands into my pockets, and delivered the final, crushing blow. I stopped loving you the moment you said I wasn't family. Her breath hitched. I turned away and walked out. I didn't stop when she called my name. I didn't pause when I heard the tremble in her breath, the effort it took for her to hold back tears. I didn't look back, not when I stepped out of the hotel, not when I disappeared into the night, leaving her alone to face the weight of everything she had lost. And as I walked away, I knew with absolute certainty this was the last time I would ever see Isabella Mercer. Her new reality. Isabella never reached out again after that night. No calls. No messages. Nothing. But that didn't surprise me. What was left to say? For years, she had carefully constructed a narrative where she was the visionary behind Hypersync, the genius who had built it from the ground up. And for a while, the world had bought into her story. But now? Now she had become a cautionary tale. The headlines told the story before she even had a chance to defend herself. By the morning after our final conversation, the media had torn her apart. From CEO to scandal, the downfall of Isabella Mercer. Hypersync implodes, was it all built on lies? Once a tech icon, now a pariah. Isabella Mercer's stunning collapse. The press was ruthless. Unforgiving. They dissected every interview she had given, every moment she had taken credit for my work, every deal she had sealed while gradually pushing me into the shadows. The scrutiny was relentless. Former employees stepped forward with their stories. Investors rushed to sever ties. Even those who had been her most loyal supporters began to distance themselves, realizing that staying aligned with her meant sinking with the ship. And then came the final blow. Hypersync's board of directors voted her out. She was officially removed as CEO. The company released a public statement filled with corporate jargon, but the message was unmistakable. Isabella Mercer was no longer the face of the company. She was no longer anything at all. The life she had carefully built for herself had crumbled. No more speaking at industry events. No more headlining tech conferences. No more media coverage celebrating her success. Only silence. I heard, through a mutual connection, that she had been desperately trying to sell her remaining shares, clinging to the hope of salvaging whatever wealth she could. But with the company in a downward spiral, her stock was nearly worthless. She had lost everything. And I I had taken it all from her. My own empire rises. While Isabella was disappearing from the public eye, I was stepping into the spotlight. 2 weeks after her removal, I made my own announcement, not about reviving Hypersync, but about something entirely new. A rebirth. SyncForge. An AI-driven platform. Smarter. Faster. More advanced than anything Hypersync had ever produced. And the best part? I wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks leading up to the launch, I had reached out to everyone Isabella had discarded, the developers, the engineers, the true architects of the software, the minds she had overlooked and undervalued. And they all returned to me. Not for money. Not for recognition. But for something more potent. For revenge. And when SyncForge launched, it was an instant success. Investors who had once pulled out of Hypersync came straight to me. Tech publications that had once praised Isabella were now writing about me instead. The same reporters who had glorified her rise were now calling me the true genius behind it all. And Isabella? She was watching it unfold. I knew she was. She wouldn't be able to help herself. Because this wasn't just about losing a company. This was her worst nightmare realized. She had spent years ensuring the world knew her name. Now, the world was forgetting her entirely. Her last, desperate call. Then, late one night, my phone rang. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But then I saw the name. Isabella. I stared at the screen, debating. Then, slowly, I answered. At first, she said nothing. Just breathing, slow, deliberate, like she was struggling to stay composed. And then, at last, she spoke. Ethan. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it before. I leaned back in my chair. Isabella. A long silence stretched between us. And then, barely above a whisper, she said, I need help. I didn't react. I kept my tone steady. Kept the satisfaction from creeping into my voice. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. For so long, she had walked the world as if she was untouchable. As if she was the queen of the tech industry, the woman who had it all. Now she was pleading. I let the silence hang, making her wait before I finally spoke. Sorry, Isabella, I said, exhaling slowly. Only family is allowed. And with that I hung up. That was the moment I ended it for good.